Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings.
There is only one Lord of the Rings.
We were filming 3 massive films all happening at the same time.
The cinematic saga that conquered Hollywood,
The Oscar goes to The Lord of the Rings,
as well as the world.
People lost their minds.
From the battlefields of World War I
Tolkien did see action in France.
to the battle of how to visualize the sprawling saga.
Retreat to the caves!
It just ends, boom.
Harvey said, well, if you don't want to do it, we'll just find another director.
They realized we have to rescue this thing.
An incalculable risk.
This hadn't really been done before.
It's the chronicle of the unlikely Kiwis,
And I thought, there's got to be another way to do this.
the outsiders.
Jackson, he was adamant. I want to film in New Zealand, and they let him.
Half the country worked on those movies.
That revolutionized filmmaking.
You know, we all sort of were along for the ride and holding on for dear life.
An epic story, an epic amount of money.
We can't afford to fail.
They would need to break the rules,
So many lawsuits were filed.
You will be blacklisted forever.
not to mention break a few bones.
You know, a lot of people got hurt.
Stitches.
Oh, my God!
The teeth came out of my mouth and flew through the air.
And there's Christopher Lee holding his face.
A cast and crew
Liv hated horses.
There was a Harvey Weinstein work.
pushed to the limit.
We had people fainting.
I remember him saying, this is not why I became an actor.
Plagued by disaster
There's flooding.
after disaster.
The police actually came and stopped us from filming.
The fate of the franchise lay in the hands of an unlikely fellowship.
Fran is a very astute director, writer.
It was the tale of love
They got romantically involved and then became creative partners.
and heartbreak,
The decision was made to let him go.
epic victories,
It was mind-blowing.
$2.9 billion at the box office.
Fantastic.
and unprecedented failure.
Are you just now working out how to shoot this?
It's the story of how an unassuming filmmaker beat Hollywood
He will persevere until he's got exactly what he wants.
without leaving his backyard.
This is the greatest adventure story there's ever been.
Amidst the luscious green rolling hills of a land very much like Middle-earth,
There's always been a Baggins living here.
could be found a powerful, wild-bearded, woolly wizard of incredible power, full of wisdom and whimsy. And his name?
Gandalf the Grey.
No.
Who are you? Show yourself! Gandalf the White.
No version of Gandalf.
No.
We're talking, of course, about the New Zealander.
Peter Jackson.
Right. And it's this wild, woolly New Zealander, along with his partner, Fran Walsh, who brought us, arguably, the greatest literary adaptation in the history of cinema.
Which I'm very thankful.
But under this wild, woolly beard can be found a boy.
Carry the fate of his own little one.
In the 1960s, this little Peter Jackson wasn't content playing with toys like the other kids.
He's wanted to be a filmmaker ever since he was 10.
I had a little Super 8 camera that couldn't shoot sound.
There was just one slight problem.
Peter Jackson is one of those guys who was movie obsessed from birth, but born in the wrong place. On the other side of the globe in New Zealand.
The film industry hadn't really taken off. We only made 1 or 2 movies a year.
But young Peter wasn't about to let that stop him.
He got interested in filmmaking about the 1933 King Kong.
The eighth wonder of the world.
It is the movie that made him want to make movies.
But this isn't the story of Peter Jackson. Well, it is, but it isn't. We're here to learn about the Lord of the Rings. And to do that, we have to return to where it all began.
Ah, yes.
Not at all Middle-earth, and not New Zealand, but rather King's Heath, England, in the very early 1900s, where the would-be author of these classic novels lived, with his mother and brother.
So Tolkien was living in this little village in England, just trees, greenery. Everything he writes about the Shire is that time when he was 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And then his mother dies, and he's a total orphan, him and his brother.
His father, he had died of rheumatic fever. His mother, she died with diabetes.
This good Catholic father puts them up in a boarding house.
He helped them continue their education. He was a very kindly man, and he cared very deeply about both of them and was always looking out for them.
Through his teenage years and into adulthood, Tolkien fell in love with language.
He loved the sound of words and the relationship between sound and meaning and how these things could influence each other.
But he also loved Mother England, enlisting to fight during World War I.
His battalion was sent to France. His unit did see action in France. They were in the trenches at Battle of the Somme.
Yet amidst the muddy horrors of war, Tolkien wasn't struck by a bullet, but by inspiration.
Tolkien came down with trench fever and was sent to the hospital. While he was in this period of recovery, that's when we see him starting to write all these stories that have been fizzing in his head.
That time, from when he was still in the hospital to when he was recuperating afterwards, his writings really began to blossom. And a lot of the things that he would go on to write, many of them were written during that time.
After the war was over, he and his small family moved back to Oxford.
Yet, even as he continued life, back in the real world of academia,
At Oxford, Tolkien was a very popular lecturer.
his fever dream persisted.
He said he was grading exams. The candidate had done the kindest thing a candidate can ever do for an examiner, which is to leave a page blank.
And here, on this page,
Blank, glorious.
J.R.R. Tolkien penned the most consequential words of his life.
So I'd scribbled on it, I can't think why. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit.
The Hobbit was the tale of Bilbo Baggins, an unlikely hero thrust into a grand adventure.
So The Hobbit grew from this light adventure story that he started telling to his muse's children to include deeper matters and traces of his growing mythology.
He wrote The Hobbit over the course of something like 3 years.
And he has a friend that's a publisher, he sends it to him, and they have their son look at it, and their son can't put it down.
The question was, of course, would the general public pick it up? On its release in 1937, that question was answered.
The first printing sold out by Christmas.
This is the greatest adventure story there's ever been. There's so many creatures, and there's dragons, and there's hobbits, and there's spiders.
So with the success of The Hobbit, the publisher says people want more.
The Hobbit thing is a winner. Write us some more fun Hobbit stories. If you can keep churning these puppies out, we can keep selling them, and this is going to be fantastic.
And so, riding a groundswell of Hobbit enthusiasm, Tolkien got straight to work on the sequel.
He started working on The Lord of the Rings, and it would take him 17 years.
Well, he did have an entire world to immerse you in.
Middle-earth stands upon the brink of destruction.
And for Tolkien, it was all about the little things.
Concerning hobbits.
You get lost in these arcane questions about very minor points. How long an elvish pregnancy lasts?
Tolkien would spend 2 pages describing a forest or a meadow.
Or what other races besides hobbits ate mushrooms?
Mushrooms!
Tolkien's expansive, granular world was the perfect palette for this new tale of Middle-earth. A tale that follows young
Frodo Baggins
on an epic quest.
By the way, his name wasn't Frodo yet. The original name of Bilbo's heir was Bingo Baggins. For really a quite distressing length of time.
That name certainly would have played very differently.
Welcome to Rivendell.
Bingo Baggins.
But in the end,
Frodo!
was his name-o.
Tolkien finally decided to change his name to Frodo.
And after 18 years, one very large novel called The Lord of the Rings was complete.
It was so long. It's in this post-war period when there's paper shortages and a really high cost of paper, and the British economy is in bad shape. And the publisher agreed to publish it, but they say, we're going to publish it as 3 books. We cannot publish it as one giant book the way you want. and we can't pay you in advance for something that we think we might lose money on. In exchange, if there ever are any royalties, you'll get like 20% rather than the normal 10%.
I think we might have made a mistake.
Turned out to be the worst contract that any publisher has ever signed anywhere, but how could they possibly know it would sell hundreds of millions of copies?
But that success didn't come overnight, as Tolkien had yet to find an audience in the States.
American sales were kind of stagnant until the publishing company Ace took advantage of a legal loophole and published a cheap paperback edition without Tolkien's permission.
The books were public domain in the US, so they're like, we're gonna be fine.
The publication was controversial.
And then, with that controversy, people started reading it.
The books gained this entire new second wave of life and became a cult classic in ways that it had never been before.
The problem was that if Tolkien didn't own the rights to his novels in the US, did that also mean his life's work was fair game for Hollywood to plunder as well?
I don't want to be in a battle.
Only time would tell. The unauthorized publishing of the Lord of the Rings trilogy in the United States left Tolkien wary of his ability to control the rights to his own creation. However, it wasn't all bad news.
Those inexpensive paperbacks were the basis for that campus craze in the late 1960s.
College students everywhere were just, madly in love with this.
Where you'd see buttons and graffiti, Frodo lives, Gandalf for president.
Tolkien now found himself a celebrity of sorts.
And I think it took him a bit by surprise.
This aging, old-fashioned, conservative, Catholic Oxford Don had people calling him at 3 o'clock in the morning. He was puzzled and bemused by the kind of popularity that he achieved.
But it wasn't just kids in college. Tolkien had captured the hearts of the most unlikely audience.
American hippies, and with whom he had very little in common.
In the middle of the earth, in the land of Shire, lives a brave little hobbit whom we all admire.
That's right. At 73 years old, Tolkien had officially become an icon of the counterculture.
Was back to nature, was, tree hugging, anti-materialistic, hippie culture.
The finest weed in the South Valley.
Hobbiton, it was that kind of world.
And a lot of hippies were rock musicians.
You could hear Tolkien's influence on hit artists like Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin.
When Led Zeppelin released a song that references Lord of the Rings, everybody went, "Ooh, they're Tolkien fans."
But beyond rock stars, Lord of the Rings spoke to the fears of a generation.
That generation converged on Washington, D.C. to demonstrate their opposition to the Vietnam War.
Americans who shared the anti-war sentiment found that sentiment to resonate with things in The Lord of the Rings.
It's quite possible, without the flower-powered fans of the 60s, Tolkien's works may have slipped into obscurity.
The universal appeal of Lord of the Rings spread beyond the hippies eventually.
The publication of The Lord of the Rings made fantasy go mainstream for adults in ways that it never had before.
And so it was that talk began of Tolkien's words leaping off the page and onto the silver screen. However, J.R.R. was initially reluctant to enter that conversation.
He doesn't think that it's going to work when you have to follow the Hollywood tropes.
And not just make it into some kind of vehicle for something else.
You mean like a vehicle for a globally popular pop band?
The Beatles were 2 films into a 3-film deal with United Artists, and they were looking for the 3rd film to complete that deal. All 4 of the Beatles had read the books. Apparently, John Lennon was the one who was really spearheading the idea.
John Lennon would be Gollum. Paul McCartney would be Frodo.
Gandalf.
Yes?
George Harrison would be Gandalf.
I've thought of a better use for you.
And Ringo Starr would be Sam.
Come along, Samwise. Keep up.
It is a wild scenario to imagine.
Their first choice to direct was actually Stanley Kubrick. They actually showed up on Stanley Kubrick's doorstep, the 4 Beatles, Kubrick actually invited them in, they pitched it, and at the end of the day, Kubrick turned it down.
Stanley Kubrick thought that adapting The Lord of the Rings well on film was impossible.
And on this matter, Tolkien and Kubrick saw eye to eye.
Tolkien said, if you have to suspend disbelief while watching a film, then the art has failed. I think it's very likely it would have been a complete disaster.
Nevertheless, in the years ahead, Hollywood's hunger for the ring only grew.
Pressure.
While its author only grew older. And in 1969, John Ronald Tolkien would concede to the modern world, and Hollywood got its way.
United Artists acquired the rights from the Tolkien estates directly.
He did, in fact, sell the film rights, partly because he needed the money to pay the taxes from the unexpected income from all the books.
United Artists had the rights.
So there is a script from John Boorman.
John Boorman was a director on the rise.
John Boorman, he wanted to do Lord of the Rings.
So John, he had a version.
His script is really wild. He takes that story and goes off into the strangest directions.
He had a 700-page, 3-hour script where there was a lot of sex.
And went for almost a rock and roll Lord of the Rings adaptation.
He's got this whole sequence of the Council of Elrond.
You've been summoned here to answer the threat of Mordor.
But it's like this kabuki play and Cirque du Soleil, and it's just nothing at all like it's described in the book. It would not have been Tolkien at all.
After the screenplay was put together, United Artists essentially rejected it.
We had a lot of money in it. I didn't think the book could be adaptable, even with John. Part of it had to do with the amount of effects that you would have needed. I don't know how the film would have turned out, because John never got to do it.
Boorman's unique adaptation had the unfortunate distinction of being the last that Tolkien would see.
Tolkien died in 1973.
Lord of the Rings would be back to the drawing board.
The one ring to rule them all.
In this case, the animation drawing board. At the time of Tolkien's passing, when you thought of animation,
magic mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?
one name came to mind. However, there was another animator making a name for himself.
Oh, yeah.
Ralph Bakshi was he was the opposite of Disney. He was doing X-rated cartoons.
Bakshi believed animation could be just as popular with adults.
He had first done Fritz the Cat.
Fritz having his own private little orgy.
Based off Robert Crumb's infamous comic strip.
Lovely set of eyes there.
Turns out, not only was there an audience for a sexually explicit cartoon cat, it was huge.
Fritz the Cat became the most successful animated independent feature of all time.
After a string of gross-out films, Bakshi would move on to something truly shocking.
Ralph Bakshi was an ardent Tolkien fan.
The time has come.
Bakshi said, I've seen what John Boorman did. It's not good. I'm going to try it.
There was just one slight problem. He didn't have the rights or the money to buy them.
So Bakshi contacts Saul Zaentz,
the man who had partially financed the film Fritz the Cat.
Saul Zaentz, he had a lot of money and was willing to take chances.
Ralph Bakshi. His pitch was, as an animated movie, it'll be much better.
Where is the ring, Gandalf?
You know, if you try to do it straight, you can't realize the full value of the property.
Full value that thus far had cost United Artists nearly $3 million in development.
It's like this kabuki play and Cirque du Soleil.
So, with nothing much to show for their investment, when Saul Zaentz came knocking, United Artists were more than happy to listen.
Saul Zaentz sort of took over Tolkien from United Artists.
Made a lot of sense for us at that point. We had a lot of money in it. You know, it was $3 million. And I figured, hey, let's take the $3 million that's owed to us and release this version of the film.
They gave everything but the distribution rights over to Saul Zaentz.
It was a savvy move by UA. But Bakshi and Zaentz would need to deliver. And their first hurdle, delivering the script.
I was a screenwriter on the film Lord of the Rings.
What does the ring bearer say?
My sister had been after me for a couple years. You got to read these books, you got to read these books. And I finally started reading them, and of course was completely hooked. I remember one vacation I was driving and I had the books on the steering wheel. Don't do this at home, kids. And I would look up, no cars coming, I'd read a paragraph, then I'd look up again. I literally couldn't put the books down. I had done a little screenwriting of some high school kind of documentary films after college. I read in one of the trades that Ralph Bakshi was considering doing it, and so I said, I've got to go for this somehow, and found somebody to write a note to. Somehow that note got to Ralph Bakshi. He gave me an assignment to do research, and he had a writer, he had an English writer signed up. Something happened with the writer in England, either he's busy or too much money, whatever it was. So he said, here's your shot, I'll let you write it. And we'll see how you do. You got, one shot. Bakshi early on told me, he said, let's get one thing straight. You're the screenwriter, Tolkien is the genius. Here's the 3 books, that's your Bible. Stick to that.
Chris soon learned the scope of Bakshi's vision.
Ralph Bakshi first said to me, we're going to do 3 films. But I didn't think a middle film would work.
But why ruin it?
The middle film doesn't have a beginning or ending. So I said, let's do 2 films.
Decision lies with you.
And he agreed.
It was a decision that would go down in infamy, but more on that in a bit.
I think I did 5 different scripts. Big scripts, smaller scripts, medium-sized scripts, different points of view. It was sort of gut and sort of trial and error between me and Ralph.
And with this script came the realization that what many thought was impossible was actually going to happen.
The War of the Ring has begun, Frodo.
The thing was that it was not just an ordinary project. It had been shot all in live action. We had to do a rotoscope. We get the live action, make photographs out of them. Then you go over the photographs. I worked mostly on Gandalf. He did it for the impact.
At a time when computer-generated effects were still years away, rotoscoping was the closest solution to opening up Lord of the Rings' potential on screen.
It brings certain things out that an animation that probably is impossible to have to do with special effects. It was very powerful. There was something artistic, something special.
But how special? When The Lord of the Rings premiered on November the 15th, 1978.
People were lined up around the blocks. They were so excited to see it. At first,
you cannot pass!
The end result at times was absolutely beautiful and brilliant. And other times, it looked a little odd. Significantly odd.
What's going on here?
One of the biggest criticisms was the decision to only produce a book and a half.
It just ends, boom.
They're coming!
It's right in the middle of the battle.
So too ends the first great tale of The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, and suddenly here ends part 1 of Lord of the Rings. For fans, it was incredibly frustrating.
However, not all fans were disappointed. In fact, for one young man in particular, Peter Jackson,
A new power is rising.
it was the first step in an unexpected journey that would impact not only his fate,
Embrace the power of the ring.
but in fact the future of all cinema.
Peter Jackson, the first time he confronted Tolkien was in our movie.
Greetings, Frodo.
Peter Jackson liked it and then went and bought the book.
Bakshi's Lord of the Rings was undeniably an inspiration to Peter Jackson. But ironically, it was Bakshi's earlier work that more reflected the tone of this fledgling filmmaker. Because Peter Jackson's work was, well, quite shocking.
Bad taste.
Kill them.
Dead alive or brain dead, depending on where you saw it. Or Meet the Feebles.
Meet the Feebles! Meet the Feebles!
He grew up doing everything himself. He was in it. He ran the camera, he recorded sound.
He's incredibly good at getting what's in his head onto screen.
These movies all feel like they were put together in someone's garage.
It's called a Steadicam. Normally, if you buy a proper one, they're about 40 or 50 grand, but this one cost at $20.
With scotch tape.
It's really held together by glue.
They're crazy.
Put the gun down!
Hyper gory.
It wasn't until I worked on Brain Dead that I realized just what a genius he is at shooting practical effects.
His knowledge of so many things is sort of just amazing.
But Peter Jackson's knowledge of horrendous gore wouldn't come close to preparing him for the horror that awaited him. As Peter Jackson left a trail of fake blood in his wake, one of the most consequential projects he undertook was providing special effects for the beloved British Scarecrow spin-off, Wurzel Gummidge Down Under.
Very first time I met Peter, I was a camera operator on Wurzel Gummidge, filming Down Under.
For the uninitiated,
Wurzel Gummidge Down Under was a TV show centered around a scarecrow.
while some go to film school to meet lifelong collaborators, Peter had Gummidge. But of all the relationships Peter made, none held a candle to Fran Walsh.
Fran actually met Pete when she was dating Stephen Sinclair.
Sinclair, also a writer, and Walsh began to advise Peter Jackson as he made his film Bad Taste. Eventually, the couple became collaborators, writing Jackson's film
Meet the Feebles.
Eat leg, you man-stealing slut!
Thanks to Fran, Meet the Feebles became much more than an ironic puppet movie.
That world is incredibly rich and layered and sort of sardonic and dark in its humor, but also very light in a way.
Oh, big local shit.
And I think it makes it all very bearable and uplifting.
Meet the Feebles was also where two other future vital cogs in Jackson's machine would start to show their worth.
Richard Taylor and Tanya Rogers.
Richard and Tanya stepped up, and with no prior experience, built the cast from scratch.
Richard and Tanya are so integral in the success of these films, and they continue to be integral in the success of Peter's films.
While building the Feebles, Richard and Tanya began to lay the foundation for something much bigger.
That's around the time that Weta Workshop was brought to life.
Weta Workshop is essentially a matter of necessity. It is a local solution to a problem of how do you get special effects that look like what Hollywood is doing.
Peter Jackson's relationship with Weta Workshop continued thanks to Dead Alive, while another relationship was about to fracture.
Fran, she was dating Stephen Sinclair, but they would break up though.
Peter and Fran, they got romantically involved.
As their relationship evolved, Jackson and Walsh would become partners,
as well as creative partners.
She worked with Peter ever since then.
Fran is a very astute writer.
I think Fran added some emotional side to the partnership, but that was quite important. Peter was great with the visual storytelling, and they were a great complement to each other.
Their next film, Heavenly Creatures, would signal a new direction for the pair.
Well, Heavenly Creatures is based on a true story.
Do you like your mother?
No.
And represents a perfect, sort of irresistible opportunity to jump to the next level as filmmakers.
Come with me.
It's a very strange but really amazing story about two teenage girls. I think they were around 14. And for some reason, they decided one of their mothers was their enemy. So these two teenage girls killed the mother.
Pete did not really want to make Heavenly Creatures, but Fran was really fascinated by the murder trial. You know, this is something that happened in New Zealand. You know, we have all these diaries. Let's really try and make a good script out of that.
It's a 3-act story with a tragic end.
But the transition from grindhouse to art house wasn't an easy one. To do it, they needed a seasoned cinematographer.
Of course, all his previous films had been splatter films, you know, gore. So when he asked me to shoot Heavenly Creatures, I was a wee bit weary, I must admit, but after a conversation with him, I thought, yeah, this guy knows what he's doing.
Peter and Fran, he cast the two perfect kids for it, Melanie Linsky and Kate Winslet.
'Tis indeed a miracle, one must feel, that two such heavenly creatures are real.
The film was a critical success.
Exhilarating, one of the year's best films.
The film would be distributed by Miramax, Harvey and Bob Weinstein's company. And they also signed Peter Jackson to a first-look deal.
So essentially, the next original project that Peter Jackson wanted to take on, he had to go to Miramax first. After Heavenly Creatures, they wanted to do a fantasy project.
The story goes that he and Fran and Philippa were sitting in their house wondering what to do. One of them made a joke, who has the rights to make Lord of the Rings? And they went online and found out that they could make an offer. And then I got a call from Peter asking if I would come to Los Angeles to pitch getting money to make Lord of the Rings. So a group of Wellington actors got together and played all of the parts that they wrote for Lord of the Rings as radio plays. I'd read the books. It was such a huge undertaking. As much as I trusted them, I just didn't think that anyone would try and make those books into films.
Peter knew he had the skills to pay the bills. He just had to convince everyone else of it.
So he calls up Harvey Weinstein because they have a first look deal, and he says, I'm really interested in Lord of the Rings. And Harvey's like, okay. Saul Zaentz has the rights to Lord of the Rings. They were producing The English Patient together.
The English Patient funding dried up right before they were shooting. So Harvey Weinstein came in, gave them the money. The film was made, and the film won a bunch of Oscars.
Weinstein saw Saul Zaentz as owing him one, something that could be settled by selling him the Lord of the Rings rights. But Zaentz didn't see it like that.
He was a sharp businessman. People that worked with him said he was very tight-fisted.
And I think it was a hard year of negotiations.
And this would have major repercussions for Peter and Fran.
He kept them on the hook for a long time before he really had any handle on the rights, but he told them right away, oh, no worries, we'll get them.
Little did Peter and Fran realize that this was the beginning of a journey as complex as the Lord of the Rings trilogy itself. The film, Heavenly Creatures, had announced to the world that Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh were a creative partnership to be reckoned with.
And the nominees are Francis Walsh and Peter Jackson for Heavenly Creatures.
However, Peter and Fran's passion project, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, was, well, dragging on.
When Miramax is trying to get the rights from Saul Zaentz, there's this long waiting period, but, you know, there's not a guarantee that it's going to go anywhere.
Patience, my love. And Peter needed something to happen soon. Having recently opened Weta Digital, a cutting-edge, world's-leading digital effects studio, which we will get around to telling you all about. But for now,
you have to keep those people employed. You have to have something for them to do.
Luckily, an old project was about to receive some new heat.
So one way to deal with this thing.
They had developed a script.
The Frighteners is the story of a con man.
Psychic investigator? That's right. Well, that's a good one.
Who could talk to the dead.
I hate to break this to you, but you're dead, you know? You can't smoke.
You can light him up and blow the smoke in my face.
There was only one problem.
Peter Jackson had a first look deal with Harvey for anything that he would make.
And in the case of the Frighteners, it was Universal that Peter and Fran wanted to deal with.
They had to negotiate to get the freedom to go make another movie for Universal.
Okay, well, folks, I can do a clearance, but it's not going to be cheap.
Harvey Weinstein, he knew that he had Universal in a barrel, so he managed to extract quite a bit from them.
And Peter Jackson had a demand of his own.
Pete said, I'd want to do it here in New Zealand.
He was adamant, you know, I want to film in New Zealand, and they let him.
I'm on my way.
Crews began to fly to the other side of the world, so New Zealand could double as the American Midwest.
Ready, and action!
And at that point, they jumped whole hog into it.
For that time, there were a lot of special effects.
For Weta and for Peter Jackson, it was a training ground of how to work with digital effects. It was a way of working with a giant movie star.
Kind of surprised to see you here on business, I guess.
Those were important milestones. Frighteners was going so well as it was coming together that Universal wanted to make sure they had the next Peter Jackson film. Again, Lord of the Rings, the rights were taking forever to negotiate.
And while Harvey Weinstein struggled with the film rights to Tolkien, Universal knew they had the rights in hand to something far more precious to Jackson.
Something monstrous, all-powerful.
King Kong has been his obsession since he was a child. It is the movie that made him want to make movies.
Once again, timing was perfect for Harvey Weinstein, who still had Peter Jackson on a string.
All of that is to his advantage.
He was a king and a god in the world he knew.
Weinstein was going to have a piece of King Kong. Universal's giving up so much to be able to lock Jackson down to this. I think that is how all in they were on him as a filmmaker.
And with the Frighteners ruling the box office, Jackson would have it all. Only that's not what happened.
The Frighteners belly flopped at the box office. It was a disaster.
The goddamn tragedy!
After Frighteners, Universal, they didn't want to make King Kong.
The studio pulled it.
It was beauty killed the beast.
Not only was Kong dead,
that ended Universal's interest in working with Peter Jackson.
Now, unable to put the squeeze on Universal, Weinstein continued to squeeze Saul Zaentz for the rights to Lord of the Rings.
The ring of power within my grasp.
Harvey Weinstein was a very difficult and combative producer. There are not many stories where people tell you, I had a remarkable experience.
For a share of the gross profits, Saul relented.
So Harvey got him to give him the rights to make the picture.
Harvey Weinstein had played hardball to secure the deal. But Peter Jackson wasn't beyond playing hardball himself to get what he wanted.
Pete always felt that New Zealand would be the perfect country to film a Lord of the Rings film.
And as far as Peter was concerned, it was a non-negotiable.
There were a lot of articles that said they'll never be able to make this movie in New Zealand. So that just fired Peter up.
So Peter mobilized his army. But they weren't orcs or trolls. It was an army of set designers, costume makers, willing to do everything it took to make The Lord of the Rings a trilogy for the ages.
Trees and cliffs and castles and sculptures, roads, bridges, in order to get the grass to the right length and the hedgerows to look like they've been there forever. Our greens department transplanted a whole lot of quite large trees in the hedgerows around the hobbit holes and all the gardens. To get the gardens working and looking believable, you need to give it the time. So you have plants that grow and die back, and new ones spring up, and then weeds grow.
Building Tolkien's Middle-earth was a brutal exercise and took well over a year. Thankfully, New Zealand was small enough and varied enough to make the task possible.
It does sort of feel, in a way, like a magical land.
We have varied sceneries. I mean, the north of this country is subtropical, and the bottom is snow-capped mountains. It would be difficult to find such varied landscapes in another country that was actually so close together.
However, deep into pre-production, Harvey Weinstein dropped a bombshell on Peter Jackson.
Weinstein tells them what they're going to be able to make. It's kind of a shock to the system because it's not really creatively what I think any filmmaker would think.
The plan was to make 2 films, so condense the whole trilogy into 2 films.
We're going to make them together, and they're going to cost $75 million total.
Don't you see that is madness?
75 million wasn't an arbitrary number.
Miramax had a $75 million cap, which was enforced by Disney, who owned Miramax.
They had a distribution deal that said $1 over this amount and it's not your movie anymore. And they were not going to give that up to Disney.
Under the circumstances, making Lord of the Rings seemed impossible. But Peter had an ace up his sleeve. Peter Jackson's motivation to film The Lord of the Rings in New Zealand ran far deeper than the green grass of home.
You had a workshop.
But the workshop wasn't a workshop full of wetters. It was actually a workshop full of talented practical effects geniuses. And they sharpened their claws on 2 iconic shows.
Xena Warrior Princess. Hercules.
Oh, this can't be good.
But it was good, and they were good.
The last 6 years had been the apprenticeship for all of us. Weta had developed this way of producing absolutely authentic metal weapons and lightweight chainmail out of plastic rings joined together. You could hold it in your hand unless you felt the weight of it, you would believe it to be metal. I don't believe we would have succeeded without those shows.
It really did seem like the stars were aligning for Jackson, New Zealand, and Middle-earth.
So they got to work on it.
But there was the not-so-small issue of creating a 2-film Lord of the Rings story out of 3 books.
Stray but a little and it will fail.
If it took Tolkien almost 2 decades to write the novels, How would Jackson and his writing partners, Fran Walsh and Stephen Sinclair, ever succeed? They needed a professor of Tolkienology.
Philippa Boyens.
Philippa is the living Lord of the Rings encyclopedia.
But not only did she know the Shire, she knew how to script movies.
She was well known in New Zealand as, one of the top script editors in the country.
You need people of intelligence on this sort of mission, quest.
Philippa's secret sauce scattered over the script was attention to the little things.
Thanks to Boyens in particular, all the little details were kept in place.
I think she's the secret weapon of the whole thing.
With their secret weapon, the unlikely quartet began their quest hoping to succeed where so many others failed. Yet the question remained.
In 2 scripts, can you tell Lord of the Rings and have it be Lord of the Rings?
All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
So it's a huge, huge gamble.
But Peter Jackson was not a betting man. He knew exactly what he was doing. With the script in capable hands, Peter Jackson began to focus on the visuals.
Peter had had a number of storyboard artists giving visual influence to what the script was suggesting.
There was only one way that he'd succeed in visualizing Middle-earth.
A lot of the images from Lord of the Rings that people had imprinted on their minds from reading the books, we had the guys who actually produced those images doing a lot of the conceptual drawings for the film.
Alan Lee and John Howe basically drove the look of the whole thing.
We kind of just put so much trust in those guys.
Yeah, Alan used to sit there with us and draw. It was crazy to just have him right there with us.
But although Jackson had illustrative royalty at his disposal, it was somewhere else he looked for inspiration.
We feel like we had some influence. Some of the shots, early shots especially, are almost shot for shot identical.
I think people get inspired by what they've seen, but they want to improve it.
Well, they'd give it an ending for a start.
Right in the middle of the battle, it just ends, boom.
But Peter Jackson had far more to think about. The fierce, burning eye of Sauron, a.k.a. Harvey Weinstein.
It was the mum and dad of it, One had the purse strings and one had the creative vision.
Jackson's vision was starting to make Weinstein pessimistic of his ability to shoot the film on budget.
This budget kept going up and it was now looking like almost twice that $75 million cap.
Harvey's like, I can only do it for $75 million.
And if 2 movies cost $140 million, then Harvey simply did the math.
Harvey said, we're not going to make 2 movies, we're only going to make 1.
No, never.
Of course, Pete was going, you can't do it. You can't do it with 1 movie. It's too big.
He's like, no, that's what it is. 1 single film.
Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh did not think that they could do justice to the source material with just 1 film.
After 2 years of preparing to turn New Zealand into Middle-earth,
I think it broke them.
Peter was convinced, I'm going to have to walk away from this.
Harvey said, well, if you don't want to do it, we'll just find another director that wants to do it.
It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt.
They panicked and they realized we have to rescue this thing. It cannot be a Harvey Weinstein movie.
For Peter Jackson and his fellowship, the fate of Middle-earth and the New Zealand film industry,
half the country worked on those movies,
was in his hands.